In this video, we're going to learn how to engrave a 360 design on a cup that has a different circumference on the top than it does on the bottom and has a handle, like my Stanley. Hey Maker, Emily here, otherwise known as That Mom with a Laser and the brand ambassador for Eon Laser USA. Let's face it, engraving a full wrap tumbler for the first time can be pretty intimidating. Not only do you have to figure out how to level the cup when it has, two different circumferences, you also have to figure out how to get around the handle if it has one, and you have to figure out in the software how to set up your design so that it will perfectly wrap and meet on the other end when you're engraving. I can totally see why people can get tripped up over the process, but fortunately, it's actually really doable. So let's go ahead and break down those barriers together. Are you ready? Let's go. Before we get started, I want you to know that I've created a guide for you that will cover each step that we're going to review in this video today. Click on the link below to get your free copy. All right, so I have placed my tumbler on my rotary to show you one of the issues that I'm going to have to tackle. When I get this tumbler into focus with the current lens that I have in my laser head, you see that I don't have enough clearance and the nozzle is going to collide with those little handle supports. This is a sign that I need more focal length from the tip of my nozzle to the top of my cup, something that would give me a longer focal length. What that would allow me to do is it will allow me to get my cup into focus, but still give me plenty of clearance so that when the cup rotates, those handle grips do not collide with my laser head. So for example, the standard lens on an Eon mirror is a 2-inch lens, which means I have to focus my laser at 8.5 millimeters away from the surface of any material I'm trying to cut or engrave. Otherwise, it won't cut and engrave the way I want it to. As you can see, that's not going to work for me here because 8.5 millimeters doesn't give me enough room to engrave above those tabs and not cause a collision. The solution to this problem is simple. I just need to use a lens that's going to give me a longer focal range, meaning it's going to give me more wiggle room below the nozzle. For my Eon mirror, one option is to use a 2.5-inch lens, which is going to allow me to get my laser into focus at 21 millimeters rather than 8.5 millimeters, which, as you can see here, is going to give me plenty of room to get the job done. This is going to be different for every laser. For some lasers, a 4-inch lens is going to be better. For others, your stock lens already has enough clearance and you might not need to change the lens at all. What's important is that you just understand that you need to have enough clearance underneath your laser head to engrave these types of cups. And if you don't, the way around it is to change the lens so that you do have enough clearance. With a mirror, I actually have two options. So if you have a mirror and you're watching me, listen carefully, okay? One option is to take the existing 2-inch lens that came with my laser, take it out of the 2-inch lens spot, and reposition it in the 1.5-inch lens spot on the bottom of the carrier with the dome side up. What I like about this option is that it allows you to work with what you already have and saves you money from having to buy another lens. However, it's less forgiving than a 2.5-inch lens, so if you choose to change your lens to a 2.5-inch lens, then you definitely want to make sure that you have your laser perfectly aligned. Either one of these options is going to allow me to change my focal point from 8.5 millimeters to about 21 millimeters, giving me plenty of clearance. I typically like to defocus about 1 to 2 millimeters, so that's why you see me here focusing at 22 millimeters instead of 21. All right, so I have cleaned up the disaster that was my very dirty lens casing or lens holder and lens, and now I'm going to replace it with my 2.5-inch lens. And you're going to note here, I like to write this on here to help me because sometimes looking at the millimeters confuses me. It is 18 millimeters in diameter, which is the same as your 2-inch, right? They're both 18 millimeters in diameter. However, the focal length is different. So this is 50.8 millimeters, which is your 2-inch lens. And this one is 63.5 millimeters, which is your 2.5-inch lens. So just something to point out to you guys. I'm gonna go ahead and open this guy up and set the lens in. You also want to make sure that you always put the lens in with the dome side up. Okay, so it's kind of hard to tell though because it's so little, and the dome it's kind of hard, you know, it's not as noticeable, but you want to do your best to make sure you get it with the dome side. Well, you'll know if you didn't put it in properly because your laser won't engrave properly. If you're working with a cup with a handle, then you've got to remove the handle, and hopefully the cup you're working with gives you that option. Typically, you're just going to flip the cup over and you will see the screws. Now, you see me here using a tiny Allen wrench. That's fine, it gets the job done, but when you're using a small Allen wrench like this one, on the inside screw, it gets to be a pain to work with. So if you have something that's longer like this, it's going to make your life a lot easier. Once you remove the screws, you can just gently pull off the handle and you're ready to start setting up your tumbler to engrave it. So I think one of the most intimidating things about testing a full wrap design on a tumbler for the first time is the thought of ruining your tumbler. I mean, especially if you're doing a Stanley cup like this, these things are expensive. So one trick that you can do is just use painter's tape, okay, and run a test engrave before you actually run the whole thing. And to save time, I already know that everything's going to be in focus. I've already done this a couple of times. So if you're doing it for the first time and you want to test the whole engrave on the whole cup, you totally can. For me this time, I just want to test that my seam is going to line up and that you're not going to be able to tell where the image begins and where it ends. So to save time, I'm just going to test the actual seam itself and not the entire engrave. So I'm taking my painter's tape, I'm placing it where I want to test my image. Some people like to double up. You can do that to be, extra cautious. But the trick to being successful at running a test on your tape is to use very high speed and low power. For me on my Mira, I make this go as fast as I can because I want to save time. So I go at about 800, anywhere from 600 to 800 speed and as low as 10 power. My laser won't fire below a minimum of 10% power. So that's what I do, very high speed, low power. Now to do that in the software, what I'm going to do is I am just going to select the part of the fill on each side that I want to test. So I want to make sure that this side is going to rotate and meet up with this side down here. So I'm grabbing this part of my design, I'm holding down the shift key so this stays selected, and then I'm going to grab the other half of it down here. And that's all I'm going to send over to the laser. So if I head over here and I check the preview, I can see, all right, it's only going to engrave this top half here and this bottom half of my design. I can also see how long it's going to take. And if I want to speed that up, I can try changing the pattern. This is okay to do if you have a chuck style rotary like my LightBurn grip, but if you're working with a roller rotary, then it's probably best just to stick to fill all shapes at once. Otherwise, the rotary is going to spin back and forth and will probably risk ruining your engrave. So only do this if you have a chuck. See if that saves me any time, and it saved me a little bit of time. Great, I've got everything set up. Once I'm ready to test, I'm only going to send this half and this half. So if you have cut selected graphics selected, then what's going to happen is it's only going to send what you have selected. If I don't have that selected, it will send the whole file. All right, while we're in LightBurn, let's go ahead and talk about sizing your design to fit your cup. In a perfect world, you buy a design that's already sized for the cup you're working with. But what if you get a design and you have a different cup that you want to engrave. You need to be able to measure your cup properly so that it still lines up the way you want it to when you do your 360 design. Or let's say you want to put together your own design. I'd rather empower you to teach you how to get your measurements so that you can engrave whatever cup you want to engrave with whatever image you want to use. Before you place your cup on your rotary, you're going to need to know the dimensions you're working with. For the circumference, you want to know the largest circumference. For that, I like to use a sewing measuring tape because I like that it's easy to work with and it bends right around the cup. This Stanley cup is measuring just under 32 centimeters, so it actually came out to 319 millimeters. You're going to need this measurement later on when you're setting up your rotary settings. You'll also need to measure the length of your cup. Now, this measurement is in centimeters, so you see here when I go down the length of the cup, all right, it's close to 24 centimeters, but I actually don't want it to go all the way down to the bottom of the cup. So I actually ended up going with 238 millimeters. Now, how do I get that number? Now, before I show you this, please keep in mind that I kind of girl math my way through life. So if you're a math genius, just smile, be humble about this, and we'll be done with this in just a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is eyeball where I want the image to end. I know I want it just above the number 24. So I'm going to start at 23 centimeters, and then I'm going to count those little lines until I reach where I want to be. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That looks good to me. So in my mind, that's 23 plus 8. And since converting from centimeters to millimeters, you're adding a 0 so that it's in the hundreds with 3 digits. I'm just going to add it to 23, making it 238 millimeters. I know, you're just so impressed with me right now. But listen, all that matters is that I can get myself to the finish line. You with me? All right, let's keep going. So once you have the appropriate measurements, if you're working with a different sized cup than the image you have, this is how you're going to input those measurements. First, remember that you need to have the image so that the longest part shows as your height in LightBurn. This is actually your circumference, right? So in my scenario, I'm going to unlock this. My circumference was 319 millimeters, okay? And the width, which is actually the height of my cup, okay, was 238 millimeters. Okay, now I'm going to lock it so it stays in place. You may import a design that is horizontal like this, but typically when you're working on your tumbler, you're going to have to rotate that design. So I'm going to push the period key on my keyboard and rotate the design. And then here I have my circumference, and here I have the height. But in LightBurn, it's going to look like this. Your circumference is going to be your height, and your height is going to be the width. Another thing to consider when you're setting up your design is whether or not you have to work around a logo. So here I'm showing you my tool layer. See, I have measured according to my top right origin, which is how I like to frame things. I've measured how big the logo is and where that's going to fall when I'm engraving so that I make sure I don't engrave over the logo because that's just not going to look good, right? So you definitely want to account for that when you're setting up your design. All right, so now let's set up LightBurn so that it knows we're ready to engrave on a tumbler. This is going to vary depending on the rotary you're using and the laser you're using. So if you don't have an Eon Mira, then make sure you follow the instructions provided to you by the rotary company that you get your rotary from. The first thing I'm going to do for an Eon Mira, okay, is go to machine settings. To get there, I'm going to go to edit, machine settings, and then I'm going to load from file. When you get an Eon Mira, you're given a USB, and on that USB, there's going to be rotary settings for a Rotoboss, for a PieBurn, for the Smart Rotary, and the Chuck. Select the one that applies to the rotary you're using, and then load the file and write the settings. Once you've done that, head on over to Laser Tools and Rotary Setup. In here, you're going to select which type of rotary you're using, whether you're using a chuck or a roller. In my case, I'm using the LightBurn grip, so I'm going to leave it set to chuck. Then you want to make sure that you have the rotary enabled. So if it's off, make sure you turn it on. Then head on over to input the rest of the settings. Now for the steps per rotation, this again is something that is going to vary depending on the rotary you're using. So make sure you follow the instructions from the rotary company that you got your rotary from to make sure that you input the right steps per rotation. I have an older generation Mira 7, so my steps per rotation is 10,000. However, if you have a newer model, then that might be different. So if you have a LightBurn, you're going to find that number in the user manual. So just head on over to their site, download the manual, and search for your laser. Then all that's left to do is enter your circumference, and now your rotary settings are ready in LightBurn. All right, now let's talk about setting up your cup on your rotary. When you lay down your rotary, you want to make sure that you lay it down in a way that it's perfectly straight on your laser. I like to use this bottom lip here. It makes it quick and easy for me, but you definitely want to find some kind of visual way to help you make sure that you're laying down your rotary so that it's straight. I then like to lower the back end supports so that they don't get in my way when I'm mounting the cup onto the grip. Then I'm going to take my cup and place it onto the long finger jaws for the LightBurn grip. Mine are probably outdated. If you have a newer grip, your finger jaws might look a little differently, but mine still work. Then I'm going to rotate this wheel here until the jaws expand enough to grip my cup. At this point, I like to give the back end of the cup a little bit of support, not too much, just enough so that I can use these doohickeys. I don't even know what they're called, but I like to use these to strengthen the support on the grip. This is key. I find that if you have a really good grip on your cup, a lot of things are going to go smoother for you. Then I'm going to secure everything else like the tower here so it doesn't slide on me. And if you don't have any experience working with a rotary like this one, you can see how all these different little things, can make quite a difference. Now I can finally go ahead and get my laser into focus. And because I've switched my lens from a 2-inch lens to a 2.5-inch lens, on my Mira, I'm now going to have plenty of clearance and no issue, with the nozzle colliding with the tabs. Now my new focal point for my 2.5-inch lens on my Mira is going to be about 22 millimeters. The actual focal point is 21 millimeters, but if you like to defocus like I do, then you're going to defocus a millimeter or two. So that's how I ended up with 22 millimeters. So now that I have the top half in focus, I'm going to move on to the back end and get the back end of the cup in focus. So I'm going to use my dial here to raise the cup until I get it to 22 millimeters. Aha. Now I do find I do like to double check the other end once I've moved it. Sometimes I do have to adjust it a little more. So I'm going to double check, head back over to the top of my cup, and it looks like we're good. Now that the cup's in focus, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have everything centered. I like to center everything along the center circle of my tabs, along with this screw hole right there. Having it lined up this way lets me know where my image is going to begin and end depending on the origin that I have set in LightBurn. I'm used to working with a top right origin. So see here, this is my image in LightBurn. See my green dot? That's my top right origin that I've set up in LightBurn. So this is where my image is going to begin. It's going to wrap around and then it's going to end in that same spot, centered on the circles that belong to the tabs that hold my handle. Now that everything is lined up, I'm going to go ahead and plug in my rotary to my laser. I like to do it this way because once I plug in the rotary, I can't adjust the Z-axis anymore, and I need to be able to do that to get my laser into focus. So I get the laser in focus, I line it all up, and then I plug in the rotary. So now it's all lined up. I can set my origin, and I'm going to rotate the cup just a little here to make sure it's falling on the line. That looks good. So I've got my origin set. I can go ahead and frame the job and run my test. Now, I got a little lazy here. Notice when I frame the job, it jumps off of the top of the lip there.
just a little bit. So you're going to notice on my final engrave, I'm off by just a teeny tiny bit on this top heart. Now, thankfully, most people won't care, and this is my personal tumbler, so it's not a big deal. But I would have preferred that my image lined up right where the paint coating starts on the tumbler. So I ran another example here to show you the more ideal example. All right, I know this feels like a lot of steps, but I promise you, once you do this a couple of times, it becomes second nature to you and it goes much more quickly, all right? It probably just feels this way because obviously I'm going slow to show you as much as I possibly can. All right, so I ran my test and my hearts are lining up the way that I want them. I'm not too worried about the engrave being perfect because remember, I'm going at a very fast speed here. Things are going to be nice and clear once I slow down my speed. So now that I'm satisfied, I'm going to remove that tape, put the tumbler back on the rotary, and run my job.
Looks like we did pretty good here. And I probably should have been a little more picky about where I started my origin point, but I really don't think that that's a big deal at all. If that's the worst it did, I'm winning, you know? All right, so I'm gonna clean it up. I'm just using Dawn Power Wash. I used to use LA Awesome all the time, but I prefer this stuff. It doesn't smell so bad, and it works just as well. Oh my gosh, I love it. It's looking so cute. Right, we'll keep cleaning it and then we'll take a look at the final product. Well, my friends, I hope you're feeling a little more comfortable with what the process looks like to engrave a 360 design on a tumbler, and that now you might be just a little more confident that it can be done. If you're new to my channel and you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you're brand new and you want to squash your learning curve, check out Laser Launch Academy, my course where I teach you how to go from novice to pro in just 5 weeks. With that, guys, that's all I've got for you today, and I look forward to seeing you around here soon over at That Mom with a Laser. Bye, guys.